Welcome to Mindful Drawing. I'm Robert, and I'll be your guide on this meditation practice that enters a space of mindfulness through the act of drawing. This week, we'll bring some attention to our gardens, maybe our internal space of growing and grooming, that constantly cyclical space of fertile ground that feeds our imagination and creativity, that sometimes fills up with a few weeds. We'll see if some of those invasive moments can become productive as we let them out onto the paper through our breath, through our attention to expression, through the medium of choice that we'd like to draw with. For me today, the trusty felt tip pen that moves nice and quick, allows for some variation in pressure, and just smoothly deposits its ink onto a piece of Bristol here. But whatever you'd like to draw with, pen, pencil, charcoal could be really fun. It'll all work today. We're just gonna make marks in a consistent way and let those marks be guided by our breath. And since here this week, it's been a little wintry, got some snow yesterday, everything is, de-leaved, the ground more covered and bare. So that'd be nice to also just have our inspiration, our expression be about something growing in its process, to keep that in mind that that time comes back around again and we can enjoy all parts of the cycles. Take a moment to decide what you'd like to work with, pen or pencil, what paper you have at hand. Establish your space and let's draw together. Meditation on day, focusing a little on the weeds. We'll draw a little bit of grass in small clumps and think about where your experience with that might be, whether something made up that you play and imagine with on the page, or maybe you've had some grass grow into your lawn that is pesky to deal with. But the thought is that sometimes we gotta give a little attention to those things and see what comes up along the way with the drawing. And everything seems working. You can pin the video if you want to see more of what I'm doing. But mostly you can kind of listen and move your pen or pencil, follow along and see what you find. There's no real big intended outcome. I'll think of grass as a good starting place, as it's kind of direct. It has these thin, small blades that just kind of pop up from the ground. It grows in little clusters and takes as much space as it can. So you might think of a blade of grass as something very simple, as just a sprig of a line starting somewhere and heading out in a generally controlled direction. They kind of have a sense of gravity to them. The defying of that gravity in kind of even layers, bringing a bit of their shape. You might have a sense of thickness to the grass, sense of bending to the wind and the forces around it. We come across using the little warm-up test out page here to think about what you see as some simple, somewhat linear growing plant that comes from a cluster or bunch around there. And also, as we're warming up, feeling how the hand moves. Is it a day of quick motion, that slice and decisiveness, or a day of lighter, smoother motion? We might bounce around a little bit during the drawing as a part of our attention and mindfulness, but take as your own pace what kind of feels good for the hand. Particulars in them are being aware of how we're making that mark into the paper. And I'll move to a larger sheet of paper, so the page in the sketchbook, the back of whatever you're working on. Anything can work. The size doesn't matter too much, but it'll have plenty of canvas there to explore and experiment with. No need to fill it up. One small clump somewhere may be just enough for the exercise. But as we go, we might find we add a few more in here and there around the page, working between individual engagements or step-by-step actions. A few moments with that in mind, The words have maybe trickled in a little bit. Maybe there's a few things behind the eyes and the imagination. Close the eyes to step back from that blank page, the emptiness of starting out. Just breathe a couple of times with whatever thoughts or images are inside. And that breathing, check in just a little bit, make sure you're comfortable sitting or standing, however you're engaging with the surface in front of you for drawing. Make sure you can reach it, interact with it, move it if you like, change your position as you see fit. You feel engaged and ready. Go ahead and open the eyes, bring them back into connection with that open territory of the page where anything could take place, and find somewhere on it to begin making that first mark of what might be the representation of a blade of grass pulling its way up from the ground. Spend a little time with that first engagement with the paper, maybe the grass, like a foxtail or a cat's tail or something, or wheat, has a little featheriness to the end. So we can bring some definition between starting and ending, between rising from the base and reaching out or expressing into the open air and the sunlight. And that top piece there could be a shape, oval, little marks like the hairs that stick out and hold the seed, whatever it might be. Once you've found that path, starting again somewhere near-ish the same place, somewhere near-ish the same type of mark of movement from down to up, giving perhaps as we go along greater care to the weight at the base and the lightness at the top, as plants tend to grow in that way due to their connection to gravity and distribution of resources from the soil. As you draw, these sprigs can cross or stay separate, kind of work one at a time for a little while, finding the base, traveling along with that curve, line, and completing it with a little definition to one end versus the other. You might start to find there a bit of a rhythm that we can connect with in our own breath and presence, considering when our inhalation can bring that stability and cue to establish position and presence there. Breathing in, filling out some space before beginning an action. And with that pause in our thoughts at the top of a breath, the real attention to the inhalation, the exhalation, bringing the cue to move, that release from within the body, guiding move to action, followed by a series of regular breaths that dissipate that initial energy from the intensity of inhalation and release of action. Bringing your attention for the next several subsequent growing outs here on the page to that same cycle, a little slower, a little more engaged. Inhaling, noticing the top the apex of the breath, and then exhaling the next little being onto the paper, and letting the body reconnect with that bit of embellishment up at the top. Each piece clustering tight or loose around the bottom, a shared organism, growing its way out, some beginning or center, taking up a little space. Breathing in to find and establish, and exhaling to engage and mark with your specific and noticed action. With these deeper cycles, a little slower attention, bring that noticing into the action. How do you find place to begin? Is it a wandering of the eye and the hand? A blind place and release? Till attention is drawn there. It may have been any number of things, and as you watch and observe, can you notice what the tendency is? Or give it a little guidance if something comes to mind as a way of drawing through that interface of inhalation, grounding and placing, exhalation, releasing through action, and then the light, recentering from the strong breath to normal dissipation of that energy. Few more sprigs here, maybe playing a little with the heights, noticing how things have begun to group, a product of our eyes' guidance, but also of the release into that action from the control of the inhalation. So the loose expression to the exhalation, letting out into the paper, could cause a lot of rigidity, repetition, everything at the same height. It's fine. And noticing the choice to engage and perhaps bring variation, to let the hand have a looser interaction between each cycle, or to lean into and allow the consistency to become guidance. With a cluster formed, you can move out to we fill the page, or perhaps play around a little in the composition of our paper. Take a moment to take it in, to notice where the thing had a beginning, to consider where we might engage again nearby, to continue the action and cycle of finding place and exhaling expression onto the page. And as you take a few minutes in quiet to continue drawing with that same technique and expanding on the development of the world there on the paper, You might experiment and play a little bit with your own cycle of engagement. We've been doing one breath to action to completion, each blade or growth there its own moment. You may also play with a series, one action repeated, a series of breaths growing, a series of feathering, a series of breaths growing to try something else out. And so feel free to explore in the next 3 minutes or so just what you find there in your own space of inhalation and exhalation. If you've been experimenting with the cycles, your own engagement, or maybe just noticing and finding in the quiet the nuances of your interaction with the subject, the act of drawing. Can you bring that to mind to notice your interface to the medium? Notice what guides you as you bring some guidance to the drawing. Notice your reactions, perhaps, to the difference, one sprig at a time, nice and even and slow, allows for simpler engagement, the whole part, seeing every bit of it from beginning to end, even the quick shaping here on our breath cycles, or the many to many relationship. Some grow quickly and then expand. Complexity builds, and the eyes work a little harder to see what is on the page. Might challenge the mind or entice the imagination. Each will have a different response. And we find our own flow between composition, the expression at a moment, and the cycles of engagement. You can keep working here, making more little clusters, expanding them, maybe reaching them towards each other, or if you're working just in one, continuing out. But with that full presence and engagement into the page, a sense of what it looks like, you may see opportunities for going beyond the initial sprigs, perhaps adding some filling, some new growth down below that brings more shape to the base, allowing the top to have more freedom and expansion. Potential new blades just starting their journey upward. These may allow for a little quicker action, play, taking the same motion, using it to shape the bottom, make it a straight line, give it a little curve, whatever strikes you, using it to rescate and bring complexity, blurriness to that base where things look like a whole, but the individual is simple with a line. You may even start to play with the pencil in there and add dark areas, the rooting, the connection to soil or whatever medium this cluster sits in, a stronger grounding as the emergence from a medium creates some change and disruption, intensification around the base, a connection to what's below. Or a matting of the old, the ones that came before, left a little bit. And now, with each cluster, its own moment to the page, related in proximity and space. You start to think about what connects between them. We have some foxtails growing up in our yard, or some quack grass clusters taking over to be minded and mended. They may sit in a whole medium of lighter, smaller, more manicured growth. Or perhaps they live in a little marsh, little hills, just lightly emerging from reflective water between each one. Just a moment of reaching towards the sun, letting pen move a little while the imagination works on processing through the eyes what it sees as patterns, potentials for memory. They're on the page, and as something comes to mind or does not, whichever happens, you can draw into that imagining, or we have a lot of paper, a lot of time for lines and curves. Just keep growing the clusters, keep bringing layers of breath and the wisp of the grass there as the world slowly builds and expands. And take a few minutes to draw with it, see what strikes you there on the paper now. Maybe it's a nice time to notice where that imagination journey takes you. The page empty in the beginning, bringing to it just a few ways of marking, curve, with a little bit of tension, a little bit of connection to gravity, the world we inhabit, operating in similar rules. Slowly things look like another thing. This curve is just curve of ink or pencil, graphite, starting at a point, moving in a direction and leaving behind that mark of action. Now, a fixture established in space. Enough of them start to work together in a loose or coherent way, and our mind, visually driven for the most part, sees it, wonders, what am I looking at? Our imagination maybe builds some stories. A day at the beach, time in the garden, whatever it may be. And then we open up to play, moving pen or pencil in the way we've experienced, exercised, and practiced there. Just a little slash of the wrist or forearm, whether we use that to make long strokes or light little suggestions of motion, darkness, and color of things. And maybe slowly be able to shape it into something seen both here on the paper and in our imagination. Gradually over time, they may approach each other, imagination changing to fit what is seen, and the hand searching to speak back to that imagining. In the end, some other scene living from that series of actions, from the following through of our presence and our engagement with the space and place here, may slowly emerge into something. Or perhaps we just have a lot of gently bending blades of grass, swaying, bringing character and definition to that empty page, the paper and the medium working together to form something. As you feel ready, you can bring the hand to rest. Take that moment to recognize the exiting of the exercise. You can always return if something interesting is happening there. But it's good for every long burst of energy and expression, that focused attention to one thing, to take a moment and step back, to breathe in and out a couple of times without any other influence or intention. Just the breath and the space around us bringing support to our being here. And find a little release of what builds up in time of focus, and hopefully a little relaxation, and maybe some inspiration to continue on with something for the rest of your day. Well, as the exercise comes to a close today, I feel completed, fulfilled by the time spent, the nice release into action, the cycles of more intentional breaths, bringing just a oxygenation to the body, and the emergence of something that has a little coherence visually, to me at least. Looks like clumps of some kind of marshy grass in a sandy soil, slowly gathering around, spreading, starting their new seeds, and giving a little composition to the page, a little fun and embellishment. Some weeks I like to continue drawing on it, but here I feel complete. And it's good to recognize and reflect after the exercise on how you feel. Do you want to keep going? Is the imagination excited? Or has the page taken what it was given? And now we can move on and use that relaxation and that creativity throughout our day. If you enjoyed the exercise, please let me know in the comments what you found, how you expressed through that light marking and clustering of these curves to make some growing configuration. Give it a thumbs up if you liked it, share with your friends. Come back usually every Wednesday morning here on YouTube for new episodes. Until then, draw well. Thank you.